Most people think their problem is life, but life is not heavy. The weight comes from how the mind holds it. From the moment you wake up, your thoughts rush ahead of you, dragging tomorrow into today, turning simple moments into quiet battles. You worry not because something is wrong right now, but because the mind refuses to stay where the body already is. Buddhism teaches that peace does not arrive by fixing the future or erasing the past. It appears the instant you stop resisting this moment. One small shift in awareness changes how you breathe, how you think, and how you live. When that shift happens, worry loosens its grip, time slows down, and life begins to feel open again. This is not about escaping responsibility or pretending everything is fine. It is about learning how to stand still inside yourself while the world moves. When you stop chasing control and start allowing life, something unexpected happens. Less worry, more life, and it begins now. 1. Stop living ahead of yourself. Worry survives by pulling the mind away from where life is actually happening and dragging it into a future that does not yet exist. The mind keeps projecting images of what might go wrong, replaying possible failures, losses, or moments of embarrassment as if they are already real. Buddhism teaches that this habit is the root of unnecessary suffering, because the future is not a place you can stand in, touch, or experience. It is only a thought appearing right now. When you live ahead of yourself, your body remains here, but your mind abandons the present moment, leaving you anxious, tense, and disconnected from life as it is. Most people do not realize how often they are mentally living days, months, or even years ahead of themselves. You may be eating while thinking about tomorrow's problems, walking while replaying a future conversation, or resting while imagining worst-case scenarios that have not happened and may never happen. This constant mental travel exhausts the nervous system. The body reacts as if danger is real, even when there is no immediate threat. The heart beats faster, the breath becomes shallow, and peace feels out of reach, not because something bad is happening, but because the mind refuses to stay where life is unfolding. The shift begins with awareness, not force. You do not fight the mind or try to silence it. Instead, you gently notice when it has run ahead. The moment you realize your mind has moved into the future, you have already returned to the present. From there, you anchor yourself in direct experience. Feel the weight of your body where you are sitting or standing. Notice the natural rhythm of your breath as it enters and leaves. Listen to the sounds around you without judging or analyzing them. This simple return is powerful because it brings the mind back into the body where life is actually taking place. In the present moment, most of the fears that dominate the mind simply do not exist. Right now, you are breathing. Right now, the ground beneath you is steady. Right now, nothing needs to be solved all at once. Buddhism teaches that peace is not found by solving the future in advance, but by fully arriving in the now. When you stop borrowing problems from a future that has not arrived, the mind begins to settle naturally and the nervous system relaxes because it no longer feels chased by imagined threats. This does not mean ignoring responsibilities or pretending the future does not matter. It means understanding that the future can only be met one present moment at a time. When you stay here, clarity improves and decisions become calmer and more balanced. You respond instead of panic. Life feels lighter, not because challenges disappear, but because you stop carrying multiple versions of the same problem in your head. You deal with what is real, when it is real, and only then. As this practice deepens, you begin to experience a quiet freedom. You realize that worry was never protecting you, it was draining you. By stopping the habit of living ahead of yourself, you reclaim your energy, your attention, and your sense of aliveness. Life becomes simpler, calmer, and more spacious. Not because the world changes, but because you finally stop leaving the moment where life has always been waiting for you. If you want, I can expand this even further, or continue with 2. Let go of the need to control outcomes in the same long, flowing style without short lines. 2. Let go of the need to control outcomes. Much of human worry is born from a single habit that feels normal, but quietly drains peace from the heart: the need to control how everything turns out. The mind constantly tries to predict results, manage reactions, and guarantee safety by planning every possible ending in advance. Buddhism teaches that this desire for control is one of the deepest causes of suffering, because life itself is not something that can be fully controlled. Change is natural, uncertainty is unavoidable, and outcomes are shaped by many forces beyond personal effort. When you try to hold life too tightly, it begins to feel heavy, tense, and overwhelming. Most people confuse control with responsibility. They believe that if they stop controlling outcomes, everything will fall apart. In reality, the opposite is often true. Control creates fear because it places the entire weight of the future on your shoulders. Every decision feels dangerous, every delay feels threatening, and every unexpected change feels like failure. The mind stays tense, constantly asking, "What if this doesn't go my way?" Or, "What if all my effort is wasted?" This mental pressure slowly turns living into constant guarding instead of natural movement. The shift begins when you understand the difference between effort and attachment. Buddhism does not teach passivity or giving up. It teaches wholehearted action without clinging to results. You still show up, you still try, and you still act with care and sincerity, but you release the belief that peace depends on a specific outcome. When you do your part and let go of the rest, something inside you softens. The heart relaxes because it is no longer fighting the flow of reality. Letting go of control does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop demanding guarantees from life. You recognize that effort belongs to you, but results belong to causes far larger than any single individual. When plans change or expectations collapse, you no longer see it as personal failure. You begin to see it as life adjusting itself. This understanding removes a huge amount of fear because you stop measuring your worth by how perfectly things turn out. As control loosens, trust naturally begins to grow. Not blind optimism, but quiet trust rooted in experience. You start noticing that you have survived many outcomes you once feared. You adapt. You learn. You continue. Life has carried you through uncertainty before, and it will do so again. This realization creates inner stability. Even when the path ahead is unclear, you feel grounded because you trust your ability to meet what comes, moment by moment. When you release the need to control outcomes, worry loses one of its strongest foundations. The mind no longer needs to run endlessly through future scenarios. Energy that was once trapped in fear returns as presence, clarity, and calm action. Life begins to feel more spacious, not because it becomes predictable, but because you stop demanding certainty from something that was never meant to be fixed. In letting go, you discover something surprising. Peace does not come after everything works out. Peace comes when you stop making your happiness conditional on how things unfold. You move through life with effort in your hands and acceptance in your heart, and in that balance, worry fades and living becomes lighter, deeper, and more real. 3. See thoughts as weather, not truth. One of the quiet discoveries in Buddhism is that most suffering does not come from events themselves, but from the thoughts we believe about those events. The mind constantly produces commentary, judgments, predictions, and warnings, and because these thoughts appear in our own voice, we assume they must be true. Worry grows when fearful thoughts are treated as facts instead of what they really are, temporary mental movements. When every thought is believed, the mind becomes a place of constant tension, reacting to imagined dangers as if they are already happening. Buddhism teaches that thoughts are not enemies, but they are not reliable leaders either. They arise automatically, shaped by past experiences, fears, habits, and conditioning. Just as clouds form and dissolve in the sky without effort, thoughts appear and disappear in the mind without permission. The problem begins when you grab onto them, analyze them endlessly, or build your identity around them. When a worried thought says, "This will go wrong," the body tightens, the breath shortens, and anxiety spreads, not because the thought is true, but because it is believed. The shift happens when you begin to relate to thoughts differently. Instead of arguing with them or trying to replace them with positive thinking, you step back and observe them. You notice a worried thought arise and silently acknowledge it as a mental event, not a command. Just as you would notice rain without believing the sky is broken, you notice fear without believing it defines reality. This simple change in relationship removes much of the power thoughts have over your emotional state. When thoughts are seen as weather, you stop chasing clarity inside them. You no longer need to resolve every fear before you can feel at ease. Some thoughts pass quickly, others linger, but none need to be obeyed. This creates space inside the mind. In that space, awareness grows, and awareness brings calm. You begin to experience moments where thoughts continue to arise, yet they no longer disturb your inner balance. This practice also builds patience and kindness toward yourself. Instead of judging yourself for having anxious thoughts, you understand that the mind is doing what minds do. Fearful thinking does not mean something is wrong with you. It simply means conditioning is playing itself out. When you stop taking thoughts personally, shame fades and acceptance replaces struggle. The mind becomes less harsh, and worry loses its emotional charge. As this understanding deepens, life feels more stable even in uncertainty. Thoughts may warn, imagine, or predict, but they no longer control your direction. You respond to reality instead of reacting to mental noise. Peace becomes less dependent on having a quiet mind and more rooted in knowing that you are not your thoughts. Like weather, they come and go, while awareness remains steady. In seeing thoughts for what they truly are, you reclaim freedom. You stop living inside every story the mind creates and return to direct experience. Worry fades not because thoughts disappear, but because they are no longer mistaken for truth. Life opens up, clearer and calmer, when you finally realize that the sky was never the storm. 4. Accept impermanence instead of resisting it. Much of human worry is rooted in the belief that life should stay the way we want it to stay. We become attached to people, emotions, situations, and identities, hoping they will remain stable and predictable. Buddhism teaches that this expectation quietly creates suffering, because everything in life is impermanent by nature. Relationships change, emotions rise and fall, circumstances shift, and even the person you believe yourself to be is constantly evolving. When the mind resists this truth, it lives in fear of loss, constantly trying to hold on to what cannot be held. Resistance to impermanence often shows up as worry. You worry about losing what you love, about change disrupting your comfort, or about the future taking something away from you. This fear does not come from change itself, but from the refusal to accept that change is natural and unavoidable. The mind tries to freeze life in a particular moment, believing that safety lies in permanence. When reality inevitably moves, tension arises and suffering follows. The shift begins when you stop treating impermanence as a threat and start seeing it as the basic rhythm of life. Buddhism does not ask you to stop caring or detach from everything emotionally. It asks you to understand the true nature of experience. When you deeply accept that nothing stays the same, you stop being shocked by change. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening?" you begin to ask, "How can I meet this wisely?" This change in perspective reduces fear and restores balance. Accepting impermanence allows you to experience life more fully. Joy becomes richer because you are present with it instead of clinging to it. Pain becomes more bearable because you know it will not last forever. You stop demanding that life guarantee comfort, and in doing so, you free yourself from constant anxiety. When you understand that every moment is temporary, you stop wasting energy resisting what is already passing. This acceptance also softens your relationship with loss. Loss no longer feels like personal punishment or failure. It becomes part of the human experience, shared by all. When something ends, you allow yourself to grieve without collapsing. You feel the pain without adding stories of injustice or fear about the future. The heart learns resilience, not through hardness, but through understanding. As this wisdom settles, worry gradually loosens its grip. The mind no longer needs to constantly guard against change. You trust that whatever arises will also pass. This trust creates inner stability even when external circumstances are uncertain. You become less afraid of the unknown, not because you know what will happen, but because you know you can adapt. By accepting impermanence instead of resisting it, you stop fighting the very nature of life. You move with change rather than against it. In this movement, something surprising happens. Life feels lighter, more meaningful, and more alive. You are no longer clinging to moments or fearing their end. You are simply living them fully, knowing that each one is precious precisely because it does not last. 5. Live from awareness, not reaction. Most worry does not come from what happens to us, but from how quickly and unconsciously we react to what happens. A word is spoken, a message is received, a situation changes, and before we realize it, the mind has already judged, assumed, defended, or attacked. Buddhism teaches that this reactive way of living keeps the mind trapped in cycles of stress and regret, because reactions are rarely wise. They are conditioned responses built from past pain, fear, and habit, not from clarity in the present moment. When you live reactively, life feels like something that keeps happening to you, rather than something you are participating in consciously. Emotions rise suddenly, and the mind follows them without question. Anger demands expression, fear demands escape, and worry demands constant thinking. In this state, there is no space to choose. The body tightens, the breath becomes shallow, and the nervous system remains on high alert. Even small events feel overwhelming because every reaction drains energy. Buddhism invites a different way of living, a shift from reaction to awareness. Awareness is the ability to notice what is happening without immediately needing to change it. It is the calm, observing presence that sees a feeling arise and says, "This is anger," or "This is fear," without becoming it. Awareness does not suppress emotions, nor does it act them out blindly. It creates space, and in that space, freedom appears. The shift begins with something very simple but deeply transformative: the pause. Before reacting, you pause for a single breath. That breath interrupts the automatic chain between stimulus and response. In that brief moment, awareness steps in. You feel the emotion in the body instead of immediately acting from it. You notice tension in the chest, heat in the face, or restlessness in the stomach. This noticing grounds you in direct experience rather than mental story. Living from awareness does not mean becoming passive or emotionless. It means responding with understanding instead of impulse. When awareness leads, actions become slower, steadier, and more aligned with wisdom. You speak less, but what you say carries more truth. You act less, but what you do carries more intention. Worry weakens because it depends on quick, unconscious reactions to imagined threats. When awareness is present, the mind no longer spirals as easily. Over time, this practice changes your relationship with difficulty. Instead of asking, "How do I make this feeling stop?" you begin asking, "Can I stay with this feeling without being controlled by it?" This question alone transforms suffering. You discover that emotions, even intense ones, rise and fall when allowed. They do not need to be fixed or escaped. Awareness holds them gently until they pass. This way of living also deepens compassion, both for yourself and others. When you see how your own reactions are conditioned, you begin to see the same in others. People's harsh words, impatience, or withdrawal are no longer taken as personal attacks. You recognize them as expressions of inner struggle. This understanding softens the heart and reduces conflict. Worry fades because you stop carrying emotional battles that were never yours to fight. As awareness becomes stronger, life begins to slow down internally, even if externally it remains busy. You feel more present in conversations, more grounded in movement, and more alive in ordinary moments. The mind is no longer constantly rehearsing responses or defending itself. There is a quiet confidence in knowing that whatever arises, you can meet it with clarity instead of panic. Living from awareness rather than reaction does not remove challenges from life, but it changes how they are experienced. Challenges become situations to be met, not threats to be feared. You stop being pushed and pulled by every emotion and circumstance. Instead, you stand in the center of your experience, steady and awake. In this steadiness, worry loses its power. It cannot survive where awareness is strong, because awareness sees clearly, responds wisely, and trusts the present moment. Life becomes fuller, not because it becomes easier, but because you are finally here for it, meeting each moment with presence instead of fear. 6. Find safety inside, not outside. Much of human worry is driven by the search for safety in places where safety cannot truly last. People look for security and approval, relationships, money, status, plans, routines, and certainty about the future. While these things may offer temporary comfort, Buddhism teaches that relying on them for inner stability inevitably leads to fear, because everything external is subject to change. When safety is placed outside yourself, worry becomes constant, because you are always guarding against loss. From a young age, many people are conditioned to believe that peace will come once life is arranged correctly. When I have enough money, I will feel secure. When people accept me, I will feel safe. When my future is clear, I will finally relax. Yet even when these conditions are met, worry does not disappear. It simply finds a new form. The mind shifts from fear of not having to fear of losing. This cycle continues endlessly because external conditions can never provide lasting refuge. Buddhism offers a radical shift in understanding. True safety is not something you acquire, it is something you cultivate within. Inner safety comes from knowing that no matter what changes around you, you can remain present, grounded, and compassionate toward yourself. It is the confidence that you can meet discomfort without collapsing and face uncertainty without panic. This kind of safety does not depend on circumstances, which is why it is stable. The shift begins when you notice how much energy is spent trying to control the outside world in order to feel okay inside. You may replay conversations, seek reassurance, or constantly plan ahead, believing these actions will protect you. In reality, they often reinforce anxiety by teaching the mind that safety is always somewhere else. When you gently turn inward instead, something begins to change. You start building trust in your own awareness rather than in conditions you cannot control. Practices such as mindfulness, conscious breathing, and self-compassion help establish this inner refuge. When fear arises, instead of escaping or distracting yourself, you stay present with the sensation. You feel the tightening in the body and soften around it. You acknowledge the fear without judging it or demanding that it disappear. This simple act sends a powerful message to the nervous system that you are safe enough to stay. Over time, the body learns that discomfort is not danger. Finding safety inside also changes how you relate to uncertainty. Uncertainty no longer feels like a threat that must be eliminated. It becomes a natural part of living. You realize that life has always been uncertain, yet you have continued to move forward. This recognition builds resilience. You stop waiting for perfect conditions to feel at ease and begin allowing peace to exist alongside unpredictability. This inner safety does not isolate you from others or make you emotionally closed. On the contrary, it allows you to connect more deeply. When you are not desperately seeking security from others, relationships become freer and more authentic. You listen without fear of rejection and love without clinging. Worry fades because you no longer place your emotional survival in someone else's hands. As inner safety grows, you begin to carry yourself differently through life. Challenges still arise, but they do not shake you as deeply. You respond with steadiness instead of urgency. You trust that even if things fall apart, you will remain present and capable of rebuilding. This trust is quiet but powerful, and it cannot be taken away by external change. In finding safety inside, you end one of the deepest causes of worry. You stop chasing protection in an unpredictable world and discover a refuge that moves with you wherever you go. Life becomes less frightening, not because it becomes controlled, but because you finally realize that you are not as fragile as fear once made you believe. 7. Let life be as it is. At the deepest level, worry is not caused by life being difficult, unpredictable, or imperfect. Worry is born from resistance to life as it is right now. The mind argues with reality, wishing things were different, smoother, safer, or more certain. Buddhism teaches that this inner resistance is the final source of unnecessary suffering. When you stop fighting what already exists, a profound shift occurs. Life does not suddenly become easy, but the struggle inside you comes to an end. Most people believe acceptance means weakness or giving up. They fear that if they accept life as it is, they will stop trying, stop improving, or stop caring. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Acceptance is not surrender to helplessness, it is surrender to truth. It is the willingness to see reality clearly without distortion, denial, or constant inner conflict. When you accept what is present, your energy stops leaking into resistance and becomes available for wise action. Resistance shows up in many subtle ways. You resist uncomfortable emotions by distracting yourself. You resist uncertainty by worrying about the future. You resist pain by replaying the past. Each form of resistance sends a message to the mind and body that something is wrong with the present moment. This creates tension, anxiety, and exhaustion. When you let life be as it is, you stop sending that message. The nervous system begins to relax because it no longer feels under attack by reality. Letting life be does not mean liking everything that happens. It means acknowledging what is happening without adding mental violence to it. When sadness arises, you allow sadness. When fear appears, you allow fear. You do not rush to label these experiences as problems that must be fixed immediately. Instead, you meet them with awareness and kindness. This simple act transforms suffering. Pain may still exist, but it no longer turns into despair or panic. This shift also changes how you relate to circumstances beyond your control. Life brings illness, loss, failure, and uncertainty to everyone without exception. When you fight these realities, they feel unbearable. When you accept them as part of being human, they become experiences you can move through rather than enemies you must defeat. Acceptance does not remove difficulty, but it removes the inner war that makes difficulty overwhelming. As acceptance deepens, you begin to trust life in a new way. Not because you believe everything will turn out as you wish, but because you understand that you can meet whatever turns up. You stop demanding guarantees before allowing yourself to feel at peace. You stop waiting for perfect conditions to relax. Peace becomes something you practice now, not something you postpone until life behaves differently. Letting life be also brings a surprising sense of freedom. When you stop resisting, you stop tightening around every moment. You experience life more directly, without the constant filter of judgment and fear. Ordinary moments feel richer. Simple experiences like breathing, walking, or sitting quietly begin to feel complete. You realize that much of the pressure you lived under was self-created through resistance, not imposed by life itself. This acceptance naturally leads to wiser action. When you are no longer fighting reality, your actions become clearer and more effective. You see situations as they are, not as you fear them to be. From this clarity, meaningful change can happen. Buddhism teaches that true transformation begins with acceptance, not force. You respond to life, instead of reacting against it. In letting life be as it is, worry slowly dissolves because it has nothing to push against. The mind no longer needs to constantly calculate, defend, or escape. You begin to rest inside the present moment, not because it is perfect, but because it is real. In that reality, life opens up again, spacious, honest, and alive. This is the final shift. Not controlling, not fixing, not escaping, but allowing. When you stop arguing with life, life stops arguing with you. Less worry naturally follows. More life quietly returns, and you discover that peace was never waiting in the future. It was always here, in your willingness to let this moment be exactly as it is. 8. Stop making happiness a future event. One of the most hidden causes of worry is the habit of postponing happiness. The mind quietly believes that peace belongs somewhere ahead, after certain conditions are met, after problems are solved, after goals are achieved, or after life finally becomes stable. Buddhism teaches that this belief creates a constant feeling of incompleteness because the present moment is never allowed to be enough. When happiness is placed in the future, the present becomes something to endure rather than something to live. Most people do not notice how often they delay their own peace. They say to themselves that they will relax once things settle down, that they will feel content once they succeed, or that they will be happy once they fix themselves or their life. This way of thinking turns life into an endless waiting room. Even when one goal is reached, the mind immediately creates another condition. The finish line keeps moving, and worry continues because peace is never allowed to arrive now. Buddhism teaches that happiness is not an achievement, but a relationship with the present moment. When you believe happiness must come later, you unknowingly train the mind to reject now. This rejection creates tension, the body tightens, the mind searches, the heart feels restless. Worry grows because the present moment is treated as insufficient. The irony is that the future you are waiting for can only ever arrive as another present moment. The shift begins when you question the belief that happiness must wait. You start noticing how often the mind says, "Not yet," or "Once this is over." Instead of following that thought, you gently return to what is already here. You notice small moments of okayness that were always present but overlooked. The feeling of breathing, the sense of being alive, the fact that, right now, you are surviving this moment. This does not mean forcing gratitude or pretending everything is good. It means allowing contentment to exist alongside imperfection. Stopping the postponement of happiness does not mean abandoning goals or effort. Buddhism does not reject ambition, it rejects attachment to fulfillment as a future reward. You can still work, grow, and improve, but you no longer make your inner peace dependent on outcomes. You begin to live fully now, while still moving forward. This removes a great deal of pressure because life is no longer a test you must pass to deserve calm. When happiness is allowed in the present, worry loses much of its urgency. The mind no longer needs to constantly race ahead to secure a better future in order to feel okay. You discover that peace can exist even when things are unfinished. This realization brings a quiet confidence. You stop living as if something essential is missing and start living from a sense of enoughness. This shift also changes how you experience challenges. Difficult moments no longer feel like obstacles blocking happiness. They become part of life's texture. You learn that happiness is not the absence of difficulty, but the ability to be present with life as it unfolds. Even discomfort can be held without panic when happiness is no longer treated as fragile or conditional. As this understanding deepens, life begins to feel fuller and more grounded. You stop rushing through days trying to reach a future moment where everything finally makes sense. You begin to notice the richness of ordinary moments that were previously overlooked. Eating, walking, resting, and even struggling take on a different quality when you are no longer postponing your right to be at peace. In stopping the habit of making happiness a future event, you reclaim your life from constant anticipation. You realize that worry was fueled by the belief that something essential was always just out of reach. When that belief loosens, the present moment opens. Life becomes something you are living, not something you are waiting to begin. This is a deep and subtle shift, but it changes everything. Less worry arises naturally when happiness is allowed now. More life becomes available when you stop delaying your presence. And in that presence, you discover that peace was never hidden in the future. It has always been quietly available, waiting for you to stop postponing it. 9. Stop identifying yourself with the mind. One of the most subtle and powerful sources of worry is the belief that you are your thoughts. From a very young age, most people are taught, directly or indirectly, that the voice in the head is who they are. Every opinion, fear, memory, and inner comment feels personal and absolute. Buddhism teaches that this mistaken identity is the root of deep psychological suffering. When you believe you are the mind, every thought feels like a threat or a command, and worry becomes constant because the mind never stops producing uncertainty. The mind's job is to think, compare, remember, predict, and protect. It is designed to scan for danger and anticipate problems. This function is useful for survival, but when it becomes your identity, it dominates your entire experience. A single fearful thought can define your mood for hours or days. A memory can trap you in regret. An imagined future can flood the body with anxiety. The mind does not distinguish between real danger and imagined danger. And when you believe you are the mind, you live inside this endless loop of mental activity. Buddhism points to a simple but profound insight. You are not the thoughts that appear in awareness. You are the awareness in which those thoughts appear. Thoughts come and go. Awareness remains. When you sit quietly and observe the mind, you begin to notice that thoughts arise on their own. You did not choose them. You did not invite them. They simply appeared. This observation alone begins to loosen the identification. If thoughts arise and pass without your permission, how can they be who you are? The shift begins when you stop asking the mind to define you. Instead of saying, I am anxious, you notice anxious thoughts are present. Instead of saying, I am broken, you notice the mind is telling a story of brokenness. This change in language reflects a deeper change in perception. You move from being inside the thought to standing back as the witness of it. In that witnessing, a sense of space opens. You realize that you are larger than any mental state. As identification with the mind weakens, worry loses its grip. Worry depends on belief. A thought only has power when it is taken as truth. When you see thoughts as passing mental events rather than personal commands, fear loses its authority. The mind may still warn, imagine, and doubt, but it no longer controls your inner state. You begin to feel grounded in something deeper than thought, something steady and quiet. This does not mean the mind disappears or becomes silent forever. Buddhism does not promise a mind free of thoughts. It offers freedom from being dominated by them. Thoughts continue to arise, but they no longer define your worth, your future, or your safety. You learn to listen to the mind when it is useful and let it pass when it is not. This discernment brings balance. Life feels less overwhelming because you are no longer carrying every mental movement as your identity. As this practice deepens, a new relationship with emotion emerges. Emotions are no longer seen as proof of who you are. Fear becomes an experience, not an identity. Sadness becomes a feeling, not a definition. Even joy is held more lightly. This reduces suffering because you stop clinging to states and stop fearing their loss. You become stable not because emotions stop, but because you are no longer defined by them. Living without identification with the mind also changes how you relate to others. You stop reacting so personally to words, opinions, and judgments. When someone speaks harshly, you recognize that their words come from their conditioning, not your value. When someone praises you, you appreciate it without becoming dependent on it. Relationships become freer and less charged because your sense of self is no longer fragile. This shift brings a deep sense of inner dignity. You no longer need to constantly defend yourself mentally or emotionally. You trust your awareness more than your thoughts. Even in moments of confusion or fear, there is a quiet knowing underneath that you are still here, still whole, still present. This knowing does not come from thinking, it comes from being. As identification dissolves, life becomes simpler. Decisions are made with clarity instead of panic. Challenges are faced without internal collapse. You respond to situations instead of reacting to mental noise. Worry fades because it no longer has a center to attach to. The mind continues to speak, but it no longer speaks for you. In Buddhism, this understanding is not intellectual, it is experiential. Each moment you notice a thought without becoming it, you step out of suffering. Each moment you rest as awareness instead of chasing the mind, you reclaim your freedom. Life becomes lighter, not because it becomes predictable, but because you are no longer living inside the narrow space of thought. This is one of the deepest shifts a human being can experience. When you stop identifying with the mind, you stop living as a story and start living as presence. Less worry naturally follows because worry cannot survive without belief. More life naturally appears because awareness is always alive, always here, and always free. 10. Stop resisting yourself and become whole. At the deepest layer of worry lies a quiet inner conflict that most people never fully see. It is the habit of being against yourself. You judge your thoughts, fight your emotions, reject your weaknesses, and compare your life to how you think it should be. Buddhism teaches that this inner division is one of the most painful forms of suffering, because when you are at war with yourself, there is no place to rest. Even when life is calm on the outside, the mind remains tense on the inside. From an early age, many people learn to believe that they must fix themselves before they are worthy of peace. If I were more confident, more disciplined, more successful, more spiritual, then I would finally feel okay. This belief creates an endless cycle of self-improvement, driven by dissatisfaction rather than wisdom. The mind constantly scans for flaws and mistakes, using them as evidence that something is wrong with you. Worry grows because the self is treated as a problem that must be solved. Buddhism points to a different understanding. Suffering does not come from having flaws, emotions, or confusion. It comes from rejecting them. When you push away parts of yourself, those parts do not disappear. They tighten, resist, and demand attention. Fear grows stronger when it is resisted. Shame deepens when it is hidden. Anxiety intensifies when it is judged. The very effort to get rid of these experiences keeps them alive. The shift begins when you stop trying to become someone else in order to deserve peace. Instead of asking, "How do I fix myself?" you begin asking, "Can I be with myself as I am?" This question is radical because it challenges the belief that peace is a reward for improvement. Buddhism teaches that peace is the ground from which genuine growth arises. When you stop fighting yourself, the energy used for resistance becomes available for understanding. This does not mean indulging harmful behavior or abandoning responsibility. It means approaching yourself with honesty and compassion instead of judgment. When fear arises, you do not shame yourself for being afraid. You acknowledge fear as a natural response to uncertainty. When sadness appears, you do not rush to escape it. You allow it to be felt without labeling it as weakness. This gentle acceptance creates safety inside the mind and body, allowing healing to occur naturally. As self-resistance softens, worry begins to dissolve at its root. Much of worry is driven by the belief that you cannot handle life as you are. When you accept yourself fully, even in confusion or pain, that belief weakens. You realize that you have already been meeting life moment by moment, even in your imperfect state. This realization builds quiet confidence. You stop doubting your capacity to live. This shift also transforms your relationship with mistakes. Instead of replaying them endlessly or using them as proof of failure, you see them as part of learning. Buddhism teaches that wisdom grows through experience, not perfection. When you allow yourself to be human, mistakes lose their power to define you. Worry fades because the past is no longer treated as a verdict on your worth. As inner acceptance deepens, a sense of wholeness emerges. You no longer split yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. Thoughts, emotions, strengths, and weaknesses are all allowed to exist within awareness. This wholeness creates inner stability. You stop seeking validation to confirm your value because your value is no longer conditional. Life feels steadier because your sense of self is not constantly under threat. Living from wholeness also changes how you relate to the future. You stop worrying about becoming someone else in order to survive or succeed. You trust that growth will happen naturally through presence and experience. The future is no longer a test you must pass to be okay. It becomes an unfolding that you meet with curiosity instead of fear. This inner reconciliation brings deep relief. The mind relaxes because it no longer has to maintain a constant narrative of self-correction. Energy once trapped in self-criticism returns as clarity, creativity, and compassion. You move through life with less tension because you are no longer dragging an internal enemy with you. In Buddhism, awakening is not about transcending humanity, it is about embracing it fully. When you stop resisting yourself, you stop fragmenting your experience. You stand as a whole human being, aware, imperfect, and alive. From this place, worry has little ground to stand on because there is no longer a belief that something is fundamentally wrong with you. This is the final shift. Not becoming better, but becoming whole. Not escaping yourself, but resting as yourself. When you stop resisting who you are, life stops feeling like a problem to solve. Less worry naturally follows, more life naturally opens, and you realize that peace was never waiting for a different version of you. It was waiting for your willingness to stop fighting yourself and finally come home. 11. Stop searching for meaning and start living it. One of the quiet causes of worry that follows people throughout life is the constant search for meaning. The mind keeps asking questions like, what is my purpose? Am I doing the right thing with my life? Or am I wasting my time? Buddhism teaches that this restless searching often creates more suffering than clarity, because meaning is treated as something hidden somewhere else, waiting to be discovered in the future. When meaning is always elsewhere, the present moment feels empty, incomplete, or wrong, and worry becomes a constant background noise. From a young age, many people are taught that life must have a grand explanation or a clearly defined path to be worthwhile. If they cannot see it, they feel lost. The mind then begins to analyze every decision, compare itself to others, and question whether each step is correct. This mental pressure turns living into a performance rather than an experience. Worry grows because the mind believes it must figure life out before it can relax. Buddhism offers a different understanding. Meaning is not something you find by thinking harder or searching farther. Meaning is something that reveals itself through presence. When you are fully present with what you are doing, life feels meaningful without needing explanation. When you are absent from the moment, even the greatest achievements feel hollow. The problem is not a lack of purpose, but a lack of presence. The shift begins when you stop demanding that life explain itself to you. Instead of asking, "What does this mean?" you begin to ask, "Can I fully live this moment?" This shift changes everything. Washing dishes becomes meaningful when done with awareness. Listening becomes meaningful when done without distraction. Even pain carries meaning when it is met with honesty rather than resistance. Meaning stops being an idea and becomes a felt experience. Much worry comes from comparing your life to imagined versions of how it should look. You worry that you are behind, off track, or missing something important. Buddhism teaches that these comparisons are created by the thinking mind, not by reality. Life is not a straight line with milestones that must be reached on time. It is a living process, unfolding uniquely for each person. When you stop measuring your life against abstract standards, a great weight lifts from the heart. Living meaningfully does not require certainty about the future. It requires sincerity in the present. When you give your full attention to what is in front of you, life responds with a sense of rightness that cannot be explained logically. This does not mean everything feels pleasant. It means everything feels real. Worry fades because you are no longer trying to solve life before allowing yourself to live it. This shift also transforms your relationship with uncertainty. When meaning is treated as something that must be known in advance, uncertainty feels terrifying. When meaning is lived moment by moment, uncertainty becomes part of the journey rather than a threat to it. You stop asking for guarantees before allowing yourself to engage with life. You begin to trust that clarity will arise through experience, not through endless mental planning. As this understanding deepens, you realize that life has always been offering meaning through simple presence. Breathing, caring, learning, and enduring are meaningful when lived fully. You stop postponing your life while waiting for a perfect explanation. You stop standing outside your experience trying to label it. Instead, you step inside it and live it directly. This also softens your relationship with regret. When you believe life has a fixed meaning that you might miss, the past becomes a source of anxiety. You replay decisions and worry that you chose wrong. Buddhism teaches that wisdom grows through living, not through choosing perfectly. Every experience contributes to understanding when it is met with awareness. Regret loses its grip when you stop treating the past as a mistake and start seeing it as part of learning. Living meaningfully also changes how you relate to death, which is often the deepest source of worry. When meaning is placed in future achievement, death feels like a threat that steals purpose. When meaning is lived in presence, death becomes a reminder to be fully alive now. Buddhism does not deny impermanence. It uses it to awaken appreciation. Knowing that life is fragile does not make it meaningless. It makes it precious. As you stop searching for meaning and start living it, worry naturally weakens. The mind no longer needs to constantly question your worth or direction. You feel grounded not because you have answers, but because you are engaged with life as it is. Each moment carries its own completeness when you are present. This is not a dramatic realization, it is a quiet one. Meaning does not arrive with fireworks, it arrives with attention. When you stop trying to figure life out and start living it, something settles inside you. The endless mental search ends, and life begins to feel whole again. This is the shift from philosophy to living, from asking to being, from worrying about meaning to embodying it. Less worry follows, because there is no longer a belief that something essential is missing. More life appears because you are finally here, participating fully in the only place meaning has ever existed, the present moment. 12. Stop trying to become someone and learn to be. At the deepest layer of human worry lies a quiet exhaustion that many people feel but rarely name. It is the exhaustion of constantly trying to become someone. From early life onward, the mind is trained to believe that peace lies in transformation, that you must improve, evolve, succeed, heal, awaken, or arrive somewhere else before you can finally rest. Buddhism teaches that this endless becoming is one of the most subtle forms of suffering, because it keeps you chasing a future version of yourself while overlooking the life that is already here. Most people live with an invisible pressure to be different from who they are now. They believe that if they could just change enough, think differently, feel less fear, or become more confident, then life would finally settle. This belief turns the present moment into a waiting room. You are always preparing, fixing, adjusting, and striving, rarely allowing yourself to simply be. Worry grows because the mind treats the present self as unfinished and inadequate, constantly measuring it against an imagined ideal. Buddhism points to a radical truth. The self you are trying to become is created by thought, while the life you are trying to escape is happening now. When you live in constant becoming, you miss being. Being is not passive or lazy. Being is the direct experience of existence without the burden of self-judgment. It is the simple awareness of breathing, sensing, feeling, and existing without trying to improve the moment. The shift begins when you notice how often the mind says, "Not like this," or "I should be different." Instead of following that thought, you pause and ask whether there is truly something wrong with this moment, or whether the discomfort comes from resistance. Often, what feels like dissatisfaction is not caused by reality, but by the mind's refusal to allow what is already present. When you stop arguing with who you are in this moment, a surprising sense of relief appears. Learning to be does not mean abandoning growth or effort. Buddhism does not reject learning, discipline, or transformation. It rejects the belief that your worth depends on becoming someone else. When you rest in being, growth happens naturally, without violence toward yourself. You act not from deficiency, but from clarity. You improve not because you hate who you are, but because you care. As this understanding deepens, worry begins to lose its foundation. Much of worry is driven by the fear that you are not enough to handle life as you are. When you allow yourself to be fully present, even with fear, confusion, or uncertainty, that belief weakens. You realize that you have been meeting life all along, imperfectly but continuously. This realization builds trust in yourself, not as an idea, but as a living presence. This shift also transforms how you experience time. When you are always becoming, time feels scarce. You feel rushed, behind, or late. When you rest in being, time opens. Moments feel complete instead of transitional. You stop living as if life will start later. You stop postponing your right to feel at ease. Life becomes something you inhabit rather than something you chase. Learning to be also softens the inner critic. The voice that constantly evaluates, compares, and corrects begins to quiet, not because it disappears, but because it is no longer believed. You see that the critic is part of the mind's attempt to control and protect, not a reflection of truth. When you stop identifying with that voice, compassion naturally arises. You treat yourself with the same patience you would offer someone you love. As being becomes familiar, your actions change subtly but powerfully. You listen more deeply. You respond more honestly. You move through life with less tension because you are no longer performing for an imagined future. Relationships become more authentic because you are no longer trying to prove or perfect yourself. Worry fades because there is no longer a belief that you must constantly improve in order to be safe or accepted. Buddhism teaches that awakening is not about becoming extraordinary. It is about fully inhabiting ordinary life. When you stop trying to become someone, you discover the richness of being human. Breathing, feeling, struggling, learning, and loving are no longer obstacles on the way to life. They are life itself. This realization brings deep rest, not the rest that comes from finishing everything, but the rest that comes from stopping the inner chase. You realize that peace does not wait at the end of self-improvement. It exists in the willingness to be present with yourself exactly as you are. Less worry follows naturally because there is no longer a belief that something essential is missing. More life appears because you are no longer living in pursuit of another version of yourself. This is not a dramatic ending, it is a quiet return. A return from striving to presence, from becoming to being. When you stop trying to become someone and learn to be, life stops feeling like a project and starts feeling like a home. 13. Stop waiting for inner peace and allow it to emerge. Many people live with the quiet belief that inner peace is something they must eventually reach. They imagine a future state where the mind is calm, emotions are stable, and life finally feels settled. Until then, they endure worry, tension, and restlessness, believing these are temporary obstacles on the way to peace. Buddhism teaches that this belief itself is one of the most subtle causes of suffering, because it turns peace into a destination instead of recognizing it as a natural quality that appears when resistance ends. When peace is treated as something that must be achieved, the present moment becomes unacceptable. The mind constantly judges the now as incomplete, noisy, or flawed. Thoughts like, "I am not there yet," or "I still need to work on myself," quietly dominate awareness. This creates an endless inner postponement. You are always close, but never arrived. Worry grows because peace feels fragile and distant, something that could be lost or delayed by the next problem. Buddhism points to a simple but profound truth. Peace is not created by eliminating thoughts, fixing emotions, or arranging life perfectly. Peace emerges when you stop fighting your experience. It is already present beneath mental activity, like stillness beneath waves. The problem is not the presence of movement, but the refusal to allow it. When you stop demanding that the mind be quiet before you can rest, rest begins to appear naturally. The shift begins when you notice how often you are waiting for peace instead of allowing it. You may notice thoughts saying that once anxiety ends, you will relax, or once circumstances improve, you will feel okay. Instead of following these thoughts, you gently turn toward what is present. You feel the body breathing. You notice sensations without judging them. You allow thoughts to pass without chasing or resisting them. This simple allowance creates space. In that space, peace begins to reveal itself, not as an absence of activity, but as an openness that holds everything. Allowing peace does not mean forcing calm or suppressing discomfort. It means letting experience unfold without interference. When fear arises, you do not label the moment as broken. You allow fear to be felt without adding a story of danger. When sadness appears, you do not rush to escape it. You allow it to move through awareness without resistance. This allowance does not intensify suffering, it softens it. The body relaxes because it is no longer being pushed or corrected. As this understanding deepens, you realize that peace is not dependent on conditions. It can exist even in difficulty. You may still feel pain, uncertainty, or confusion, but they no longer disturb the deeper sense of okayness underneath. This does not make you detached from life. It makes you more present. You experience emotions fully without being overwhelmed by them. Worry weakens because it depends on the belief that the present moment is unsafe or insufficient. Waiting for peace also creates self-judgment. You may believe that if you were more disciplined, more spiritual, or more advanced, you would finally feel calm. Buddhism gently dissolves this belief by showing that peace is not a reward for progress. It is a natural state that appears when striving ends. When you stop measuring yourself against an imagined ideal, the nervous system relaxes. The mind no longer feels chased by self-improvement. Allowing peace changes your relationship with thoughts. Instead of seeing thoughts as obstacles, you see them as movements within awareness. Thoughts may come and go, but they no longer define your state. Peace becomes the background rather than the goal. This creates a sense of stability that does not depend on mental control. You stop asking whether you are peaceful enough and begin noticing the quiet presence that has been here all along. This shift also transforms how you meet the future. When peace is postponed, the future becomes heavy with expectation. You feel pressure to arrive somewhere emotionally before life can be enjoyed. When peace is allowed now, the future loses its emotional charge. You still plan and act, but without desperation. You trust that peace does not disappear just because uncertainty exists. This trust reduces anxiety and restores a sense of ease. As allowing becomes familiar, life slows down internally. Even in busy moments, there is a sense of spaciousness. You are no longer rushing to escape your experience, you are living it. Ordinary moments feel complete rather than transitional. You stop waiting for a better version of now. You rest inside what is present. This realization is subtle but deeply transformative. Peace was never absent. It was obscured by resistance, striving, and waiting. When you stop waiting for inner peace and allow it to emerge, worry loses its urgency. The mind no longer needs to fix, solve, or escape every moment. Life becomes less about arriving and more about inhabiting. This is not the end of effort, but the end of struggle. You continue to live, grow, and respond, but from a place of inner steadiness. Peace becomes something you recognize rather than achieve. And in recognizing it, you realize that it was never waiting in the future. It has always been quietly available, patiently present, beneath everything you have been trying to chang. 14. Stop trying to escape discomfort and learn to stay. At the root of much worry lies a simple but powerful habit, the habit of escaping discomfort. Whenever something unpleasant arises, whether it is fear, sadness, uncertainty, loneliness, or inattention, the mind immediately looks for a way out. It distracts itself, overthinks, plans, scrolls, numbs, or worries about the future. Buddhism teaches that this constant attempt to escape discomfort does not free us from suffering. It quietly deepens it. When you are always running from discomfort, discomfort becomes frightening, and worry becomes your constant companion. From an early age, many people learn that feeling uncomfortable means something is wrong. They are taught to fix, suppress, or avoid unpleasant emotions as quickly as possible. Over time, this creates a deep fear of inner experience. The mind begins to believe that certain feelings are dangerous or unbearable. Worry grows because the mind is always scanning for potential discomfort, trying to prevent it before it appears. Life becomes a constant strategy of avoidance rather than a lived experience. Buddhism offers a radically different approach. It teaches that discomfort itself is not the problem. Resistance to discomfort is the problem. When an uncomfortable sensation arises and you immediately try to escape it, you send a message to the nervous system that something dangerous is happening. The body tightens, the mind accelerates. Fear multiplies, but when you stay, when you allow the sensation to be present without trying to change it, something unexpected occurs. The discomfort begins to soften, not because it disappears, but because it is no longer being fought. The shift begins when you notice the urge to escape. You feel anxiety rising, and the mind wants to distract itself or imagine a future where the feeling is gone. Instead of following that impulse, you pause. You gently turn toward the sensation itself. You notice where it lives in the body. Perhaps it is a tightness in the chest, a heaviness in the stomach, or a restless energy in the limbs. You do not analyze it or label it as good or bad. You simply stay with it, breathing, allowing it to exist. Staying does not mean forcing yourself to endure pain heroically. It means meeting discomfort with curiosity rather than fear. You are not trying to get rid of the sensation, and you are not judging yourself for having it. You are simply present. This presence creates safety. The body learns that discomfort can be felt without catastrophe. Over time, the nervous system recalibrates. Feelings that once triggered panic begin to feel manageable. As this practice deepens, you begin to notice something important. Discomfort is not permanent. Sensations rise, change, and pass when allowed. It is resistance that freezes them in place. When you stop running, emotions regain their natural movement. Fear flows through instead of becoming anxiety. Sadness flows through instead of becoming depression. Uncertainty flows through instead of becoming chronic worry. This shift also transforms your relationship with the mind. Much of worrying is an attempt to escape discomfort by solving the future in advance. The mind believes that if it can predict and control what happens next, discomfort can be avoided. When you learn to stay with discomfort instead, the mind no longer needs to work so hard. It begins to rest. You realize that you do not need to know what will happen in order to be okay right now. Learning to stay also builds deep self-trust. Each time you remain present with a difficult feeling without collapsing or escaping, you prove to yourself that you are capable. This builds confidence that no external reassurance can provide. You stop fearing your own inner world. Life becomes less threatening because you are no longer afraid of what you might feel. This does not mean life becomes painless. Pain still arises, loss still hurts, fear still appears. But these experiences no longer define your life. They become part of a larger field of awareness that is steady and compassionate. You suffer less because you stop adding layers of fear, judgment, and resistance to what is already present. Staying with discomfort also deepens compassion for others. When you are no longer afraid of your own pain, you become less reactive to the pain of others. You listen more deeply. You judge less quickly. You understand that everyone is navigating discomfort in their own way. This understanding softens relationships and reduces conflict, which further reduces worry. As this understanding settles, life begins to feel more honest and grounded. You stop demanding that every moment feel comfortable. You stop believing that peace depends on pleasant sensations. Peace becomes the ability to stay present with whatever arises. This is a quiet but powerful freedom. Nothing needs to be pushed away for you to be okay. In Buddhism, awakening is not about floating above discomfort. It is about being fully present within it. When you stop trying to escape discomfort and learn to stay, worry loses its grip because it no longer has anything to protect you from. You are already here. You are already capable. And in staying, you discover that life, even in its difficult moments, is something you can meet with openness rather than fear. This is the shift from avoidance to presence, from fear to trust, from running to resting. When you learn to stay, less worry naturally follows, not because life stops challenging you, but because you stop abandoning yourself when challenge arises. 15. Stop treating life as a problem and start meeting it as an experience. One of the deepest habits that quietly fuels worry is the way the mind turns life itself into a problem that must be solved. From the moment something feels uncertain, uncomfortable, or unclear, the mind begins searching for answers, strategies, explanations, and guarantees. It believes that if it can just figure everything out, peace will finally arrive. Buddhism teaches that this problem-solving approach to life creates endless mental tension because life is not a puzzle meant to be completed. It is an experience meant to be lived. When life is treated as a problem, every moment becomes a test. You are constantly asking whether you are doing it right, whether you are ahead or behind, whether this situation should be happening or not. Worry grows because the mind believes that something has gone wrong whenever life does not match expectations. Even neutral moments feel heavy because the mind is always waiting for clarity before allowing itself to relax. This habit often begins early. People are taught that security comes from answers, plans, and certainty. Over time, the mind learns to distrust experience itself and rely almost entirely on thinking. When something unexpected happens, instead of feeling it directly, the mind immediately analyzes it. It asks why it happened, what it means, and what should be done next. While thinking has its place, living inside thought cuts you off from the richness of direct experience. Worry thrives in this gap between thinking and living. Buddhism offers a different way of relating to life. It teaches that life does not need to be understood in order to be lived. Experience does not ask for explanation before it can be felt. Breathing does not require analysis. Walking does not require certainty. Feeling does not require permission. When you stop demanding that life makes sense before you allow yourself to be present, a deep shift occurs. You move from managing life to meeting it. The shift begins when you notice how often the mind labels experience as a problem. You feel uncertainty, and the mind says something is wrong. You feel sadness, and the mind says it must be fixed. You feel confusion, and the mind demands answers. Instead of following these demands, you gently pause and bring attention back to direct experience. You feel the sensation in the body. You notice the breath. You allow the moment to be exactly as it is, without needing to explain it. Meeting life as an experience does not mean abandoning intelligence or responsibility. It means recognizing the difference between practical thinking and compulsive thinking. Practical thinking responds when needed. Compulsive thinking reacts constantly. When you stop treating every moment as a problem, the mind becomes quieter, not because you force it to be quiet, but because it no longer feels obligated to solve life. As this understanding deepens, worry begins to loosen. Much of worry is fueled by the belief that you must mentally prepare for every possible outcome in order to survive. When you shift into experiencing rather than solving, you discover that life is met moment by moment, not thought by thought. You stop trying to live 5 steps ahead. You stop rehearsing futures that may never arrive. You return to the simplicity of what is actually happening now. This shift also changes how you experience uncertainty. When life is treated as a problem, uncertainty feels unbearable. The mind demands answers before allowing peace. When life is treated as an experience, uncertainty becomes part of the texture of living. You realize that uncertainty has always been present, even during moments you thought were stable. The difference now is that you are no longer fighting it. You allow not knowing to exist without panic. Meeting life as an experience also transforms how you relate to pain. Pain no longer feels like evidence that something has gone wrong. It becomes a sensation that arises and passes within awareness. You feel it directly instead of layering it with stories of injustice or fear. This does not remove pain, but it removes the suffering created by mental resistance. Worry fades because the mind no longer needs to constantly protect you from experience. As this way of living becomes familiar, you notice a quiet aliveness returning. Colors seem sharper, sounds feel closer, simple moments carry depth. Life feels less abstract and more intimate. You stop living inside concepts and return to the immediacy of being alive. Even difficult moments feel more manageable because you are no longer standing outside them trying to control them. This shift also brings humility and softness. When you stop trying to solve life, you stop placing yourself above it. You stop demanding that life conform to your understanding. You become a participant rather than a controller. This creates harmony rather than conflict. You move with life instead of against it. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is not found in perfect answers, but in clear seeing. Clear seeing happens when experience is allowed without interference. When you meet life directly, insight arises naturally. You know what to do not because you have solved life, but because you are present with it. Action becomes simpler, more grounded, and less driven by fear. As worry continues to fall away, you realize something profound. Life was never asking you to figure it out. It was asking you to show up. It was asking you to feel, to listen, to respond, and to live. When you stop treating life as a problem, the burden of constant mental effort lifts. You no longer carry the weight of needing to understand everything before you can be at peace. This is the shift from mental struggle to lived presence, from control to participation, from fear to openness. When you stop treating life as a problem and start meeting it as an experience, worry naturally dissolves because there is nothing left to solve. There is only this moment, alive, unfolding, and available. In this way of living, peace is not something you achieve after everything makes sense. Peace is what remains when you stop insisting that life be something other than what it is. Less worry follows naturally. More life opens effortlessly, and you discover that living was never meant to be managed. It was meant to be experienced fully, honestly, and directly, one moment at a time. 16. Stop measuring your life and learn to live it directly. One of the most hidden sources of worry is the habit of measuring life. The mind constantly compares where you are to where you think you should be. It measures success, progress, happiness, spirituality, productivity, and even peace. Buddhism teaches that this constant measuring quietly drains joy from living, because life itself is not something that can be accurately measured. The moment you begin comparing your experience to an imagined standard, the present moment loses its wholeness and becomes something to judge rather than something to live. Most people do not realize how deeply this habit runs. You measure yourself against others, against your past, against your expectations, and against ideas of what a good life should look like. You ask whether you are ahead or behind, improving or failing, growing fast enough or wasting time. Even moments of peace are measured, judged as insufficient or temporary. Worry grows because the mind believes that falling behind is dangerous and that arriving somewhere better is necessary for safety. This habit of measurement creates an invisible pressure that never truly ends. No matter how much you achieve or change, the measuring mind finds something else to evaluate. If things go well, it asks whether they will last. If things go poorly, it uses them as proof that something is wrong. Life becomes a scoreboard instead of an experience. Even rest feels earned rather than natural. Even joy feels conditional. Buddhism points to a quiet but radical truth. Life is not a project with milestones that must be reached on time. It is a living process unfolding moment by moment. When you measure life, you step outside of it. You turn yourself into an observer rather than a participant. The mind believes it is helping by tracking progress, but in reality, it pulls you away from direct experience and replaces it with constant evaluation. The shift begins when you notice the act of measuring itself. You catch the mind comparing your current moment to an idea of how it should be. You notice thoughts that say you should be further along, calmer, happier, more certain, or more accomplished. Instead of arguing with these thoughts, you simply recognize them as habits of the mind. You do not follow them. You return to what is actually happening. You feel the body breathing. You notice sensations. You allow the moment to be exactly as it is without turning it into a verdict. Living directly means experiencing life without constantly standing outside of it to judge it. When you eat, you eat. When you walk, you walk. When you feel sadness, you feel sadness. You stop asking whether the moment is meaningful enough, productive enough, or aligned with some imagined timeline. You allow life to be lived rather than evaluated. This does not mean you stop learning or reflecting. Buddhism does not reject reflection. It rejects compulsive comparison. Reflection looks gently and learns. Comparison looks harshly and judges. When reflection arises from awareness, it supports wisdom. When comparison arises from fear, it creates suffering. Learning to tell the difference changes everything. As you stop measuring, worry begins to soften. Much of worry is fueled by the fear of being behind. When you stop believing that life is a race with a finish line, that fear loses its grip. You realize that there is no universal schedule for growth, healing, or understanding. Life unfolds uniquely for each person, shaped by conditions beyond personal control. Accepting this truth brings deep relief. This shift also transforms how you experience time. When you measure life, time feels scarce and pressurized. You feel late, rushed, or stuck. When you live directly, time opens. Moments feel complete rather than transitional. You stop living as if the present is merely a stepping stone to a better future. You begin to inhabit your life instead of chasing it. Living without constant measurement also changes how you relate to others. Comparison often creates quiet separation. You see others as ahead or behind, better or worse. This creates subtle tension and insecurity. When you stop measuring, connection becomes simpler. You meet people where they are without ranking or comparing. Compassion grows because you recognize that everyone is navigating their own unfolding just as you are. This shift also softens your relationship with failure. When life is measured, failure feels like falling behind or wasting time. When life is lived directly, failure becomes experience. You learn from it without using it as proof that something is wrong with you. Worry fades because the past is no longer treated as a scorecard. It becomes part of the journey rather than a judgment. As direct living deepens, a sense of aliveness returns. You notice details that were previously overlooked. The feeling of air on the skin, the sound of footsteps, the quiet rhythm of breathing. Life feels less abstract and more intimate. You are no longer living in ideas about life. You are living life itself. This does not mean life becomes easy or always pleasant. Difficulty still arises, confusion still appears. But these experiences no longer feel like evidence of failure. They feel like part of being human. You stop asking whether you are doing life correctly and start responding to life honestly. This honesty brings strength. Buddhism teaches that freedom is not found by becoming better according to mental standards. It is found by being fully present with what is. When you stop measuring your life, you stop fragmenting it. You allow each moment to stand on its own, complete in itself. Worry has little space to grow in this completeness, because there is no longer a belief that something essential is missing. This is a deep shift. It is the movement from judgment to presence, from comparison to participation, from anxiety to immediacy. When you stop measuring your life and learn to live it directly, less worry naturally follows, because there is no longer a scale you must constantly check. More life appears because you are finally here, not evaluating the moment, but inhabiting it. In this way of living, peace is not something you earn by doing life correctly. Peace is what remains when you stop standing outside your experience and step fully into it. Life no longer feels like something to manage or optimize. It feels like something to live. And in living it directly, you discover that this moment, just as it is, has always been enough to hold you. 17. Stop trying to control the inner journey and allow it to unfold. At a certain point on the inner path, worry no longer comes from obvious fears about money, relationships, or the future. It comes from something much quieter and more subtle, the urge to control your inner journey. You begin to worry about whether you are healing correctly, growing fast enough, awakening properly, or becoming the person you think you should be. Buddhism teaches that this attempt to manage the inner path creates a refined form of suffering, because the inner journey is not something that can be controlled without losing its depth. Many people bring the same mindset they use to manage the outer world into their inner life. They want progress, timelines, clear milestones, and measurable results. They ask themselves whether they are calmer than before, wiser than last year, or closer to peace than they were yesterday. When answers feel uncertain, anxiety appears. The mind treats the inner journey like a project that must be optimized. Worry grows because the self is again placed under evaluation. Buddhism gently reveals a different truth. The inner journey is not linear. It does not move steadily upward. It unfolds in cycles, pauses, openings, and returns. There are moments of clarity followed by confusion, periods of openness followed by contraction. This is not failure. It is the natural rhythm of deep change. When you try to control this rhythm, you resist the very process that allows transformation to happen. The shift begins when you notice the desire to manage your inner state. You catch thoughts that say you should be more peaceful by now, more detached, more aware, or less reactive. Instead of following these thoughts, you pause and recognize them as expressions of impatience rather than wisdom. You realize that awareness itself cannot be forced into a shape. It deepens when allowed, not when pressured. Allowing the inner journey to unfold does not mean abandoning intention or practice. Buddhism does not teach passivity. It teaches trust in the process. You continue to meditate, reflect, and live with awareness, but you release the demand that these practices produce immediate or permanent results. You stop checking yourself constantly to see whether something has changed. You let change happen quietly, beneath the surface. As this trust grows, worry begins to loosen its hold. Much of worry is driven by the fear that you are doing something wrong internally. When you accept that the inner journey includes confusion and discomfort, these experiences lose their threatening quality. You stop interpreting every difficult phase as regression. You understand that deep transformation often feels like losing your way before clarity returns. This shift also transforms how you relate to setbacks. When you try to control the inner journey, setbacks feel personal and discouraging. You believe you have lost something or failed to maintain progress. When you allow the journey to unfold, setbacks become part of integration. You see them as moments where old patterns are surfacing to be seen, not signs that something has gone wrong. Worry fades because the path no longer feels fragile. Allowing the inner journey also changes how you experience effort. Effort becomes gentle and consistent rather than tense and demanding. You show up to your practice without expecting it to fix you. You live mindfully without expecting perfection. This kind of effort is sustainable because it is rooted in curiosity rather than fear. The mind relaxes because it is no longer chasing an imagined endpoint. As control loosens, a deeper form of trust emerges. You begin to trust awareness itself. You realize that something within you has been learning and adjusting long before you became conscious of the process. Life has been shaping you through experience, not through planning. This realization brings humility and relief. You no longer feel solely responsible for your inner evolution. This shift also softens your relationship with uncertainty. When you stop controlling the inner journey, you accept that not knowing is part of growth. You allow questions to remain unanswered. You allow periods of confusion without demanding immediate clarity. This openness creates space for insight to arise naturally. Worry dissolves because you no longer believe that uncertainty is dangerous. Allowing the inner journey to unfold also deepens compassion toward yourself and others. When you recognize how complex and non-linear growth is, you stop judging yourself harshly. You also stop judging others for where they are on their path. You understand that everyone is unfolding according to conditions you cannot fully see. This understanding reduces conflict and comparison, further easing the mind. As this way of being stabilizes, life begins to feel less pressured and more intimate. You are no longer racing toward enlightenment or peace. You are living your life with awareness as it is. Even difficult emotions feel workable because they are no longer seen as obstacles to progress. They are seen as part of the terrain. Buddhism teaches that awakening is not something you make happen. It is something that happens when resistance falls away. When you stop trying to control the inner journey, you remove one of the last forms of resistance. Awareness opens naturally. Insight arises without effort. Peace appears not as a permanent state, but as a steady background that remains even when experiences change. This does not mean the end of struggle forever. Life continues to present challenges, but your relationship with those challenges is transformed. You meet them with patience instead of urgency, curiosity instead of fear. Worry loses its grip because there is no longer a belief that you must control your inner state to be okay. This is a deep surrender, not to helplessness, but to intelligence larger than the thinking mind. You stop forcing growth and allow it to mature in its own time. In doing so, you discover that the inner journey was never asking to be controlled. It was asking to be trusted. When you allow the inner journey to unfold, something settles deeply within you. The constant self-monitoring quiets. The pressure to arrive disappears. Life feels less like a path you must navigate correctly and more like a landscape you are exploring with openness. Less worry naturally follows because there is nothing left to manage so tightly. More life appears because you are finally walking the path instead of standing above it trying to control it. This is the shift from effort to trust, from management to presence, from anxiety to openness. And in this openness, the inner journey continues, not as a project to complete, but as a living process that unfolds with its own quiet wisdom. If there is one truth running quietly through all of these realizations, it is this: worry was never the enemy. Worry was a signal. It was showing you where you were resisting life, resisting yourself, or trying to control what was never meant to be controlled. Buddhism does not teach you to destroy worry or fight it into silence. It teaches you to understand it so deeply that it no longer needs to exist. Each shift you explored was not about adding something new to your life, but about removing what was never truly needed. You stopped living ahead of yourself and returned to where life actually happens. You let go of controlling outcomes and discovered trust. You stopped believing every thought and learned to rest as awareness. You accepted impermanence and stopped fearing change. You learned to respond instead of react. You found safety within instead of chasing it outside. You allowed life to be as it is instead of arguing with it. You stopped postponing happiness, stopped identifying with the mind, stopped fighting yourself, stopped searching for meaning, stopped becoming and learned to be, stopped waiting for peace, stopped escaping discomfort, stopped treating life as a problem, stopped measuring yourself, and finally stopped trying to control your inner journey. What remains when all this stopping happens is not emptiness. What remains is presence. And presence is not dull or passive. Presence is alive, grounded, and quietly powerful. It does not promise a life without pain, but it offers a life without unnecessary suffering. It does not remove uncertainty, but it removes fear of uncertainty. It does not guarantee comfort, but it gives you the strength to stay. Less worry is not something you force. It is something that naturally fades when resistance ends. More life is not something you chase. It is something that reveals itself when you stop leaving the present moment. Peace is not found at the end of effort. It appears in the absence of struggle. This is not a dramatic transformation. There is no final arrival where everything is solved forever. Buddhism teaches something far more honest and freeing. Life continues. Emotions rise and fall. Thoughts come and go. Challenges appear and pass. But your relationship to all of it changes. You stop standing against life and start standing with it. You stop abandoning yourself and start staying. You stop asking life to be different and start meeting it fully. When you live this way, worry no longer needs to shout to get your attention. It dissolves quietly because it has done its job, and life no longer feels like something you must survive or manage. It feels like something you are participating in, moment by moment, breath by breath. Less worry does not mean less care. It means clearer care. More life does not mean constant pleasure. It means deeper presence. And presence is the greatest gift Buddhism points toward, not as an idea to understand, but as a reality to live. Nothing needs to be added, nothing needs to be achieved. You are not behind, you are not broken, you are already here. And here is where life has always been waiting for you.